the 7th year since my best friend and I transmigrated into this book together. She brought me good news. As long as this body dies, we can return to our original world. After saying this, she leaped from the high tower. The splattered blood soaked into her husband's sleeve. The man who had just accused her of putting on a show was now wide-eyed with horror, his heart shattered. I looked past him, toward the man not far away, gently comforting there one that got away in his arms. That man was my husband, the monarch of this realm. I thought, it's time for me to go home too. The night I witnessed Clara's suicide, I had nightmares all night long. I woke up drenched in cold sweat, my hands and feet icy. The maids and attendants serving in the inner chamber heard the commotion and immediately lit lamps, draping a thin quilt over me. But my heart still raced uncontrollably. Clara's words from earlier that day echoed in my mind. She said, "Ilara, I found a way home. The system told me our mission was completed 2 years ago. As long as our bodies in this world die, we can break free from the plot and return home." As she spoke, her eyes shone with a brilliance I hadn't seen in ages. In that moment, a flicker of hope ignited within my heart as well. But soon I fell silent again, uncertain whether this was real or just Clara's fantasy. After all, 2 years ago was a critical turning point. Clara and I had transmigrated into this world together. The system promised to send us home once we completed the storyline. To fulfill the mission, we married Emperor Julian, then Crown Prince and Prince Theron, the third prince, becoming renowned virtuous consorts in the capital. We supported them through thick and thin until fortunes turned. One ascended as emperor, the other became the celebrated virtuous king. Yet despite this harmonious plot, our task remained unfinished. The system claimed one final trial remained. Though puzzled, Clara and I simply carried on with our lives. Fortunately, Clara and Prince Theron shared genuine love, their days sweet as honey. And though Emperor Julian ruled the realm, he never treated me poorly. In the Crown Prince's palace, I was his crown princess, though his birth mother was the empress. She was not favored. The late emperor preferred the imperial consort and the 9th prince she bore. The title of crown prince was the only thing the late emperor ever gave to Julian. Beyond that, not an extra word of care or a single glance was spared. As the 9th prince grew older, Julian's position as crown prince grew increasingly precarious. During the hardest times, though his birth mother was still alive, aside from his full-blooded brother Theron standing by his side, I was the only one left with Julian. Fortunately, despite all the dangers and obstacles, Julian ultimately ascended to the throne. After his enthronement, his first decree was to install me as empress. From then on, he left the rear palace empty, unmoved no matter how hard the civil and military officials racked their brains to push their daughters into it. He respected and loved me, unwilling to let me suffer any grievance. I knew he always resented the late emperor for favoring the imperial consort and neglecting his lawful wife. Once, when our hearts were aligned, Julian held my hand and vowed he would never become a failed husband and father like the late emperor. Yet, in the end, he broke his promise. After enduring so much hardship, our peaceful days lasted only a year. 1 year after Emperor Julian ascended the throne, Princess Seraphina, the one that got away from both his and Prince Theron's youth, returned from her political marriage on the steppes. It seems every man carries the memory of an unattainable love from his youth, and the 2 imperial brothers were no exception. The Empress Dowager bore not only these 2 princes, but also a frail daughter, Princess Camelia, who was born delicate due to the Empress's melancholy during pregnancy. She was the girl whom the imperial brothers had cherished and protected like the apples of their eyes since childhood. But when the late emperor sought to send a bride to the steppes for political marriage, his selection fell upon the delicate princess. Given her frail health, the long journey to the steppes would have been too harsh for her to endure. In the end, it was Princess Seraphina, who had grown up alongside them, who volunteered before the emperor to undertake the political marriage to the steppes. Even so, the young princess did not survive that winter. The brothers' unresolved guilt was thus multiplied and transferred to Princess Seraphina, who had taken her place. Now, with Princess Seraphina's glorious return, it was inevitable that she would be cherished by the two most powerful men in the capital. At first, Emperor Julian managed to restrain himself quite well. The first to lose his composure was Prince Theron, the virtuous king. That day's palace banquet was originally held to welcome the return of Princess Seraphina, yet someone had to add fuel to the fire, openly gossiping about the princess in front of everyone, saying that according to the customs of the steppes, she should have married the new king after the old one died, and it was truly strange that she was sent back instead. Such words brought tears to Princess Seraphina's eyes just as she was about to enter. It also completely enraged Prince Theron, who had grown up with her since childhood. That day, the virtuous king, known for his gentle demeanor, resorted to violence for the first time. He beat the offender until blood flowed at the banquet. He could have punished the offender in countless discreet ways, but nothing short of such a public spectacle seemed to quell the fury in his heart. With the boldness of a passionate youth, he caused the scene to make it clear to all that even though Princess Seraphina had been married and widowed, she was still the one cherished like the apple of his eye by Prince Theron, the virtuous king. That day, all present witnessed clearly how the virtuous king, renowned for doting on his wife, when the princess attempted to intervene in his struggle with Princess Seraphina, he shoved her away. Clara fell stumbling to the side, her lower abdomen striking the corner of a table. Blood immediately stained her robes, and scattered porcelain shards cut her palms. In a daze, she watched Prince Theron, who had sworn to cherish her forever, and thus, bewildered, lost her first child. "The Queen Mother is bleeding," someone exclaimed in alarm, yet Prince Theron seemed not to hear, still consumed by his rage, rather than concern for his wife, who had supported him throughout his journey. He worried more that Princess Seraphina might face future slights. So he positioned himself protectively before Princess Seraphina and coldly declared to the guests with varied expressions, "Henceforth, anyone who dares speak ill of Princess Seraphina will have the entire royal villa as their enemy." Seeing this, I rose from my elevated seat and immediately ordered my trusted nanny to take Clara back and summon the royal physician. I had just stepped behind Prince Theron as he finished his declaration. "Theron." I called his name in a low voice, then struck him hard across the face as he turned around. For 7 days, I was tormented by nightmares woven from the past. When I woke again, my body felt utterly drained. Emperor Julian was sitting by my bedside, keeping watch over me. He looked at me, his eyes slightly reddened, his brow heavy with deep self-reproach. Yet the moment our gazes met, he guiltily looked away. He knew how profound my bond with Clara was, yet he was one of those who drove her to prove her integrity through death. Clara died on the day he celebrated Omping's birthday with the honors befitting an imperial consort. Before that, Clara had presented the token of affection Emperor Julian bestowed upon his ascension, pleading for an imperial edict of divorce. But Emperor Julian refused her request, even though it was a promise from the emperor, one Clara had once risked her life to protect him to earn. Yet, to spare Omping the scandal of breaking apart the deeply devoted couple known as the virtuous king and his wife, he chose to seal Clara's final escape route. When Clara died, her blood splattered onto Omping's skirt. Startled, Omping let out a faint cry and hid in Emperor Julian's embrace. He instinctively held her tighter, whispering words of comfort. Only when his eyes met mine did Emperor Julian seem to belatedly realize that the woman who had died so tragically before him was once his benefactor, someone who had risked everything to help him when he was at his lowest. Emperor Julian released Omping from his arms. Though he was now the emperor, he appeared visibly unsettled. He tried to speak, but I paid him no further attention. I slowly stepped forward, gently wiping the blood from Clara's face with my sleeve, then removed the token of affection hanging around her neck. "Wait for me a little longer. What is owed to us must be repaid before we go." Clara and I grew up in the same orphanage. She was carefree by nature, always able to overlook pain too easily, which allowed her to adapt wherever she went. But I am different. I've always been petty, holding grudges and seeking retribution. Clenching my fist to suppress the overwhelming rage, I avoided looking at anyone and turned to leave directly. I left Emperor Julian behind, and from beginning to end, I never spoke another word to him. From that day on, I shut the palace gates tightly and fell gravely ill. Now, Emperor Julian sits beside me, looking utterly lost as he gazes at me. He reached out to brush away the stray hair on my cheek, but lowered his arm under my indifferent stare. Shouldn't you be comforting Princess Seraphina? I couldn't resist the sarcastic jab. After all, she's the delicate one who cries if anyone speaks too loudly in her presence. Clara only lost her life saving yours. But Seraphina was truly frightened. Emperor Julian seemed choked by my words, offering a bitter smile after a long pause. Empress, please don't be like this. In the past, whenever he called me that, I'd quickly remember my place and smoothly offer him the way out he desired. But this time, I stayed silent, leaving him hanging with no response. When my expected compliance didn't come, he tentatively ventured after a long wait. Seraphina didn't mean it. I've confined her to her quarters as punishment. I didn't even let him finish. I snatched the medicine bowl beside me and hurled it at him. The dark medicinal brew stained his dragon robe. Get out, I spoke with blunt brevity. It was the first time I had ever openly insulted him before others. The palace servants trembled and dropped to their knees in fear. Emperor Julian's expression shifted uncertainly. Finally, he turned away in a fury, his sleeves whipping as he stormed out. After he left, another visitor sought an audience. It was Prince Theron. As a prince, he should not have entered the inner palace. But Theron had gone mad. He would rather risk execution than stay away. He demanded, Clara must have left words for me. Ilara, tell me. Wrapped in a heavy cloak, I sat in the hall, observing the deranged man before me. Haggard and disheveled, he bore no resemblance to the once celebrated top gentleman of the capital. His eyes bloodshot, Theron pressed on frantically. She was only acting, wasn't she? She always used such tricks to get my attention, to bully Onthing. How could she really jump? How could she? Indeed, after returning from Onthing, the sweet days of soul, deep understanding between Clara and Prince Theron were gone forever. Unlike me, who had guarded my heart from the start, that foolish girl had truly fallen in love with Theron, a gentle, witty young prince and the maiden who descended from the heavens to save him from peril. Their love seemed the most natural thing in the world. So, when she lost their first child, she wept bitterly day after day. At first, Theron was consumed by guilt, staying by her side, endlessly repentant and swearing such a tragedy would never happen again. But later, Princess Seraphina visited the manor and deliberately provoked Clara with mentions of the dead child. Clara, emotionally shattered, struck her. After returning home, Seraphina attempted to hang herself, but was rescued by servants. From then on, the one Theron attended to shifted from Clara to Seraphina. The fault for the child's death lies with me. Direct your anger at me if you must. Seraphina never intended to harm you, yet you've ruined her reputation and subjected her to public scorn. She has suffered enough. Clara, this is a debt we owe her. From then on, Prince Theron often spoke such words, drifting further and further apart from Clara, the young prince who once smiled and tapped her head with a folding fan when she was a clumsy newcomer to this strange world, patiently guiding her, who tenderly bandaged her wounds when she was hurt, and who unhesitatingly stood by her side when noble ladies framed her, seemed to have vanished forever. Onthing's schemes against Clara grew increasingly crude, yet the blind and foolish refused to see. And now, he kneels before me in agony. I just don't want to regret again. Back then, I was too weak to protect Princess Camellia. I only wish to protect Onthing now. That's all. Why won't Clara believe me? Aren't we husband and wife? Why can't she understand me? Hearing this, I couldn't help but burst into laughter. How dare you call yourself her husband? Have you forgotten? Clara petitioned for a divorce from you a year ago. Prince Theron looked up sharply, his expression wary. Ilara, what have you done? As his words faded, the voice announcing the imperial decree arrived. It was Emperor Julian who issued the decree. This time, he accepted the token of affection and granted Clara's pre-death request for divorce. Now that the virtuous king and his consort are divorced, the virtuous king's consort has regained her freedom and will be buried as a woman of good family, not to share a grave with Prince Theron in the future. I sat on the high seat, looking mockingly at Prince Theron. What kind of husband were you? From the moment you stopped trusting her, you were no longer worthy of being her spouse. After speaking, I stared into his eyes and said word by word. As for Clara's final moments, she didn't mention you even once. You thought she was putting on a show for you, but in her heart, you had long meant nothing. Prince Theron went mad and was dragged away by the surrounding guards. Weary, I leaned back in my seat, my gaze drifting to the shadows where Emperor Julian stood, unnoticed until now. Is this your compensation? You know, this isn't what I wanted. I looked at him, my voice icy. Clara lost her life. The one responsible should pay with theirs. Ilara. Emperor Julian stood in the shadows, hesitating for a long time before speaking with difficulty. Onping, she didn't mean to. Even he probably didn't believe these words himself. Yet he still chose to defend Onping, deceiving his own conscience. Emperor Julian might not have realized it, but the tenderness in his eyes when he looked at Onping was something he never showed anyone else. He restrained his overwhelming love, clinging to his vow of loyalty to his feelings. Yet in the end, he failed to uphold either. In that moment, I was utterly exhausted, my spirit completely broken. I said, I understand. Get out. Emperor Julian stood frozen, as if my demeanor had struck him deeply. His gaze toward me, now, held a mix of unfamiliarity and confusion. In the past, to be the virtuous partner of the crown prince, I always maintained a gentle and magnanimous facade. In moments of passion, he would hold me and sigh, having a wife like you is my greatest fortune. Now that I know the way back, there's no need to hide my true nature anymore. I said, Emperor Julian, if you can't bear to kill her, if you feel indebted to her, then repay it with the life of your own benefactor. How utterly despicable. These words are truly treasonous. Emperor Julian's face darkened. Empress, you've gone mad. Yes, I've gone mad. I laughed joyfully, stepping forward slowly, raising my hand to gently caress his cheek. I said, Emperor Julian, I'm dying too, and I don't want you anymore. That day, he practically fled in panic from the central palace. Thus, he didn't hear my final words. I said, if I'm to die, none of you shall live well either. I've never been a generous person. I account for everything, from emotions to material possessions. I've always believed only in equal exchange of interests, never easily trusting in so-called sincerity between men and women. Even in my previous life with Emperor Julian, our marriage would have been called a model couple even in the era I came from. Though an ancient feudal emperor, he voluntarily vowed to be with me alone for a lifetime. He always respected and loved me like an ordinary husband, never putting on imperial airs before me. The world marveled at my incredible fortune to have won the emperor's devotion, but I knew the truth. He offered the promise of lifelong monogamy because he needed to sever ties with his biological father. He respects and treats me well because I stood by him during his most destitute years, resolving one crisis after another for him. His loyalty is for his own sake, and his kindness is something I earn myself. All these years, I have dutifully played the role of his ideal wife, virtuous, magnanimous, courageous, and resourceful. He is content within, and I save time and effort. It is merely that, even though Emperor Julian often expresses gratitude for my presence, seeing me as more than family, yet between us, it stops there. Love was never spoken. He loves someone else, yet he refuses to let me go. I know that person once held an umbrella for him in the rain during their youth, and even hand embroidered a scented sachet for him. He couldn't protect her when he was at his weakest, leaving a lasting regret in his heart. Thus, to this day, he uses the power I strategized to obtain for him to indulge her recklessly. Emperor Julian knows I would resent Princess Serafina for Clara's death, yet he still chose to protect her, confining her to his own residence. Since he chose to oppose me, I won't let them live in peace. Fortunately, during those 2 years when I was constrained by the plot and couldn't act against Princess Seraphina, I collected quite a few things to settle scores later. I selected one of them and sent it to Prince Theron. It was a deed of servitude for a maid from their household. Prince Theron must still remember her. Her name was Rosalind, born into poverty, bought by Clara just before being sold into a brothel and arranged to work in her courtyard. At that time, she was immensely grateful to Clara, calling her a life-saving bodhisattva, which left Clara flustered and unsure how to respond. Yet later, it was she who claimed Clara mistreated the servants. Thus, in a fit of resentment, she poisoned Clara, causing the death of their unborn second child. By then, Clara was already heartbroken and had no thoughts on how to deal with this maid. It happened that Princess Seraphina, who was visiting the royal villa, took matters into her own hands out of righteous indignation and ordered Rosalind beaten to death on the spot. A rather crude scheme. With a little thought, it was clear who was behind it. Yet Prince Theron's suspicions stopped at Rosalind. He refused to dig deeper. He merely deluded himself, comforting Clara by saying they would have another child someday. How could there be? By then, Clara's heart had already turned cold toward Theron. She knew, if not Rosalind, someone else would harm the child in her womb. She never wished to bear Theron's heir again. She had only seized the opportunity. Now, I handed Rosalind's deed of servitude to Prince Theron, which documented her place of origin and family details. If Theron investigated, he would find all those people had already been wiped out. Someone had silenced them overnight. With Theron's capabilities, uncovering the true culprit wouldn't be difficult. It merely depended on when the self-deceiver would choose to wake up. This time, Prince Theron acted swiftly. Matters Clara had defended herself against countless times while she lived, yet failed to make him see clearly. Now, he uncovered them all in just 3 days. How bitterly ironic that Clara had suffered 2 years of torment over these very truths. That night, the royal villa remained brightly lit until dawn. Seated at his desk, he pored over the gathered evidence, recounting every injustice Clara had suffered over the years. For the first time, the virtuous king confronted how he had failed as a lover, and by morning, half his raven hair had turned white. At the first rooster's crow at daybreak, Prince Theron strapped on his long sword and strode out. All called him mad. Freshly punished by the emperor, he now stirred greater chaos by storming the princess's estate with drawn blade. The entire capital witnessed it. Princess Seraphina, once cherished in his palms, fled barefoot and disheveled as the virtuous king chased her through streets, all the way to the palace gates. Her ever pristine robes were spattered with mud, her always delicate face contorted only by terror and fury. In the end, she collapsed before the palace entrance. Emperor Julian rushed out upon receiving word, but arrived a heartbeat too late. Prince Theron's sword severed Princess Seraphina's long hair. One step closer, and the blade would have slit her delicate neck. Why? I never wronged you, yet you sought to destroy my family and take everything from me. Prince Theron's voice was hoarse as he demanded an answer. I did not. How could you misunderstand me so? She was the first to shed tears, as if enduring the gravest humiliation, but Prince Theron no longer believed her. He closed his eyes, raised his sword, and resolved to perish together with Seraphina. Yet a sharp shout halted him. Virtuous king, what are you doing? Emperor Julian emerged from behind the imperial guards. Brother, Clara is dead. It is only right that I avenge her. Prince Theron looked at Emperor Julian with a despairing laugh. But Emperor Julian only responded with a cold sneer. He said, what does Clara's death have to do with Seraphina? It was your own distrust that failed her, your own actions that disappointed her. You doubted her, yet refused to set her free. The one who killed Clara was always you. At this moment, he finally understood everything. Yet, when rejecting Clara's divorce decree, he claimed it was all due to Clara's unfounded suspicions, insisting Prince Theron had never wronged her. Unable to bear seeing his younger brother so despondent, Emperor Julian softened his tone. Third brother, though Anping may have her mischievous flaws causing discord between you and Clara, you must understand, She never harbored ill intent. She is Princess Camelia's savior. He left the words unspoken as he noticed me approaching through the crowd. Instantly, his face paled slightly, and those twisted justifications stuck in his throat, rendered unspeakable, so even he could feel shame. Still recovering from illness, I was ushered forward by palace attendants, weariness in my expression. My gaze swept lightly over him before settling on his waist, and I suddenly chuckled softly. I wonder if His Majesty still wears the scented sachet I embroidered for him daily. Seemingly unprepared for this mention, Emperor Julian looked momentarily dazed before replying with gentle warmth. The Empress's heartfelt gift has never left my side, not for a single day. That scented sachet was one he asked me for right after we married. Before, he only wore Onping's sachet at his waist, but after our wedding, to show his loyalty to me, Emperor Julian proactively asked me for one to replace it. Even though my embroidery skills weren't the best, he treasured it like a jewel, wearing it daily and cherishing it immensely. Recalling the past, a trace of nostalgia surfaced on Emperor Julian's face. The next moment, Onping's flowing gaze swept over Emperor Julian's features, and she called out to him plaintively in a soft voice, "Your Majesty, elder brother." It hurts. That one word, elder brother, filled with attachment, pierced Prince Theron's heart instead. In the past, whenever Onping quarreled with Clara, she always loved calling him that. That tone, so reminiscent of Princess Camelia's, always made him soften his heart involuntarily. Elder brother. It was for this elder brother that I could even deceive my own heart. His hand caressed Onping's cheek, his eyes gradually clearing. So, you could never replace Princess Camelia. She never had such a vicious heart. Yet because of a poisonous woman like you, I hurt the one I truly love. I never begged you. You forced your affections upon me willingly. You madman. Princess Seraphina finally lost her composure, shoving Prince Theron away before lifting her skirts and darting toward Emperor Julian like an exhausted bird seeking shelter. Madman. Willing delusion. Prince Theron did not pursue her further, standing still as he savored those words, retreating 2 steps in despair before throwing his head back in bitter laughter. I am more than a madman. I am the greatest fool in this world. His grief-stricken gaze swept over the crowd and settled on me. Ilara, I see clearly at last. Princess Camelia's memorial tablet was not destroyed by Clara. Seraphina framed her. At the palace banquet that winter, Seraphina jumped into the water herself. Clara never harmed her. Even her most beloved cat, Seraphina, was the one who dashed it to its death. And our child. I see it all now, but my Clara can never return to life. As he spoke, a trickle of blood seeped from the corner of his lips in his extreme anguish. Prince Theron paid it no mind. His voice choked with emotion, recounting one by one the past events that drove him and Clara apart. Those heart-wrenching memories hollowed the eyes of that always bright, smiling girl with despair, until at last, she stood on the high platform, gripping my hand tightly, her tone resolute as she said, "Ilara, we must go home." Then she released me, turned, and fell from the high platform. Only now does he belatedly feel regret. Virtuous king, mind your words. Finally, Emperor Julian lowered his voice, sharply warning him, even at this moment, he still cares about Onping's reputation. Brother, you clearly know everything. Why won't you wake up? Must you lose your empress like I lost Clara before you're satisfied? Prince Theron's expression grew agitated as he stepped forward urgently, reaching to pull at Emperor Julian. But it was unclear which words had pierced Emperor Julian. He let out a cold laugh and raised his hand to slap Prince Theron across the face. Prince Theron's head snapped to the side from the blow. After a long while, he regained his composure and slowly smiled at Emperor Julian. "Your Majesty, in the past, Clara and I received a favor from you, and now I wish to use it." He looked directly at Emperor Julian and spoke word by word. "I wish to use this favor to request the hand of Princess Seraphina." "I refuse." Princess Seraphina sobbed, tugging at Emperor Julian's sleeve. "Brother, please, he will kill me." Emperor Julian remained silent, and the situation fell into a stalemate. Your Majesty, you have witnessed my fate. I do not wish for you to regret it. Even now, he was still scheming for his brother. But Emperor Julian was unwilling to accept the gesture, his expression dark and silent. In the end, he even cast a troubled gaze toward me. I let out a cold laugh and turned to leave without hesitation. But Prince Theron stopped me. He said, Ilara, I saw her in another world. I turned around in shock and uncertainty, only to see him staring directly into my eyes. I've seen her in my dreams, laughing joyfully in another world. He then turned the question to me, asking what the mission is and whether Clara could still return. Hearing this, I smiled faintly and replied to Prince Theron, How can the dead return? But I can tell you what the mission is. If you trade her life for it. My hand slowly pointed at Princess Seraphina, seemingly surprised that I still refused to let her off. Emperor Julian spoke with displeasure. He said, Ilara, as the empress of this nation, you cannot always act so recklessly. Princess Seraphina hid behind him and peeked out at me, a mocking smile curling at the corner of her lips. How pitiful. She mouthed the words silently at me. I showed no patience for her antics. In one swift motion, I drew the sword from the guard beside me and swung it straight at her smirking face. My sudden outburst took everyone by surprise. By the time those around us reacted, most of Princess Seraphina's right ear had been severed, blood gushing instantly. A piercing scream echoed as she collapsed to the ground. Her white robe stained crimson with blood. I looked at her and suddenly laughed. Now, you're disabled. So who's more pitiful now? Omping looked up in horror, her eyes filled with venomous resentment as she stared at me. Unfortunately, before I could strike a second blow, Emperor Julian seized my wrist, knocking the sword from my hand. Empress! Emperor Julian roared, his gaze dark and stormy as he glared at me. Yet when our eyes met, I suddenly grinned widely. Then I grabbed his collar and violently coughed up a mouthful of heart's blood. This body was already depleted, agitated, and overwhelmed. I couldn't stop vomiting blood. Leaning against Emperor Julian, I fought against my darkening vision, and only relaxed after catching the purple glow rising from his wasted scented sachet as it was soaked in blood. I said, Farewell, Emperor Julian. He didn't know that, at this moment, his life had already been sentenced to death. I wanted to say more harsh words, but the pain in my chest was truly unbearable. Yet I never expected those 4 simple words would make the Emperor before me panic. He reached out in flustered desperation, trying to wipe the blood from my lips. But the more he wiped, the more it spread. In the end, he pulled me into his embrace, tears streaming down his face. He said, No, I was wrong. I don't want anyone else. Let's not part. Deceit, what a fool. I had a dream. It was from shortly after I married Emperor Julian. Back then, Emperor Julian was still the crown prince whom the emperor disdained, with scarcely any supporters at court. At the worst of times, Emperor Julian was placed under house arrest by imperial decree, forbidden to leave without summons. He was one step away from being deposed. I pleaded before the Empress Dowager, but she remained cold and unmoved, unwilling to strain her already fragile bond with the late emperor over this matter. In the end, it was Prince Theron, trapped in the Southlands, who uncovered the list of officials embezzling flood relief funds, which Clara then risked her life to deliver. On the day I obtained the list, I disguised myself and ventured out under cover of night, holding this dangerous bargaining chip as I negotiated alone with the veteran ministers who had once supported Emperor Julian but were now hesitating. By dawn, I had finally secured the support of the late emperor's grand tutor. As we parted, he confessed frankly that he had spent the entire night debating whether to simply kill me and seize the list. After all, Emperor Julian held no value at that time. Throughout that pitch black night without a single star in sight, I brushed shoulders with death countless times. Fortunately, I succeeded in the end. This old fox who had navigated the court for decades ultimately chose to place his bets on the most unassuming Emperor Julian. Aren't you afraid of death, Mother? He asked me. Women have their own place of contentment. Why must you strive like a man?" I paid no mind to the mockery in his tone, merely lowering my gaze and speaking softly. "The crown prince is no ordinary man. He harbors grand ambitions. I will help him achieve them. What is there to fear in death?" Those words, originally spoken as part of the mission to win over Emperor Julian, eventually reached his ears. As soon as I returned to the crown prince's palace, he held me tightly, as if clutching a rare treasure. His voice was thick with emotion then, choking back sobs as he whispered in my ear, "My parents never cherished me in this life, but I am fortunate to have you, my dear." I lowered my gaze and gently patted his back to comfort him. That experience was truly perilous. The four of us once brewed wine under the moonlight after the matter was settled. It was the first time I saw Emperor Julian drunk. He lost his usual composure, his eyes reddening like a child's, and said, "My father treated me coldly. My mother treated me coldly, so I shall forsake them. I still have Alara. From now on, I want only Alara." That night, he was thoroughly drunk, his eyes warm with affection, holding my hand and repeating, "Alara, let us live well together." I glanced down at my cup without responding, merely handing him a warm tea to soothe his stomach at the right moment. "Well said." Clara, who was sitting nearby, slapped the table in agreement. She had drunk quite a bit herself and was already slurring her words. "We are all here. What 1,000 hardships should we fear? They are all trivial matters. To friendship, we are truly remarkable." The young woman raised her glass high, her cheeks flushed crimson, yet her eyes sparkled like starlight. Prince Theron leaned nearby, watching her antics with amusement, and when Clara finally succumbed to the wine and slumped onto the table fast asleep, he gently gathered her into his arms. The moonlight of that evening shone in Prince Theron's eyes, and his gaze upon Clara was unmistakably tender. Clara was eventually carried away by Prince Theron, while Emperor Julian, emboldened by drink, asked me for the scented sachet I had promised him earlier. After I personally tied it on him, he wore a contented smile and lightly kissed my fingertips. In truth, that day at Grand Tutor Lou's residence, one exchange never left those walls. It was Grand Tutor Lou's assessment of me. His hawk-like gaze seemed to pierce through this virtuous facade and probe my very soul. As he said, "The crown prince likely doesn't realize that the woman by his pillow is the most ruthless and venomous of all, just as he doesn't know. Inside that scented sachet I gave him, I had placed poison obtained from the system. Should the day come when this scented sachet is stained with my blood, the toxins within will awaken, gnawing day and night at whoever wears it. Those who take anything from me are never permitted to betray me." When I awoke again, my head throbbed with pain. The maid attending me noticed I had woken and hurried out to inform others. In no time, Emperor Julian arrived. He looked utterly weary, with faint stubble shading his jaw and lips pale and drained. While waiting for him, the servants had already told me I had been unconscious for 7 full days, and Emperor Julian had kept vigil by my side all that time, without rest, until just moments ago when he left briefly to nap. Unaware I would wake then, I leaned back against the soft pillows, listless and drained. Emperor Julian, seated beside me, wore an equally haggard expression. The royal physician said you've suffered severe depletion, damaging your vital energy. Those past hardships have worn you down. I have failed you. As he spoke, he reached out to gently stroke my hair. His outstretched arm froze mid-air under my mocking gaze, a bitter smile touching Emperor Julian's lips. I thought he would beg me to spare Princess Seraphina, to let go of past grievances. Yet unexpectedly, Emperor Julian embraced me gently from behind and said, "I plan to send the third prince to the province of Luo. Let Seraphina go with him." He buried his head in my shoulder, just as he always did in moments of vulnerability. He whispered, "Alara, don't change. Can we remain as we were before?" I did not answer him. Just then, a eunuch's announcement echoed from beyond the screen. "Your Majesty, Princess Seraphina has thrown herself into the lake." Like a stone dropped into water, a dull splash, then silence. The room felt utterly still. Only Emperor Julian's arms around me tightened instinctively, gripping harder and harder. Finally, deep into the night, the palace attendants came again, reporting that Princess Seraphina remained unconscious, her life hanging by a thread. Emperor Julian could sit still no longer. He looked at me, eyes filled with remorse. Seraphina is, after all, my benefactor. I cannot abandon her. He said, I am merely going to visit her. Wait for my return. Naturally, he would not return, and I certainly would not wait. After he departed, I rose from the couch and walked to the window lattice, where a secret letter lay waiting. The messenger had long vanished. By candlelight, I unfolded the letter to find an address inscribed, proof that treasures still lie hidden in this vast world. After reading it, I held the paper to the flame and let it burn. In the dead of night, someone retrieved the command hidden in the second drawer of my vanity. They would act on my behalf to meet a certain person. Emperor Julian did not return all night. I had a fair idea of what transpired at Princess Seraphina's estate. The poor soul, rescued from the lake, only gradually regained consciousness after Emperor Julian arrived. She threw herself into his arms, weeping like a rain-drenched pear blossom, pleading only that she refused to leave the capital, refused to be parted from the monarch's side. Seraphina, the virtuous king, has given his word. If you leave the capital with him, he will not harm you. But Princess Seraphina refused. Weeping bitterly, she asked, does the Empress sister-in-law find me intolerable? I only wish to remain in my homeland. Brother, I once ventured alone to the steppes for your sake. Somehow her words struck a chord with Emperor Julian. In the end, Seraphina departed with Prince Theron, yet scarcely beyond the capital's outskirts. Her carriage went out of control, plunging with her into a deep ravine. Princess Seraphina was effectively erased from this world. The virtuous king, who had accompanied them, refused to believe it and insisted on investigating the carriage wreckage, only to be dragged down as well. Miraculously, his injuries were not severe, but he awoke deranged, claiming he had seen his beloved at death's door. From then on, the virtuous king abandoned his duties, wandering like a lost soul and resorting to every means to harm himself, all because he believed it would let him see his departed princess again. When the news reached the capital, Emperor Julian was at my side. Upon hearing it, he merely lowered his head, gently blowing on a spoonful of medicine, his gaze focused as he fed me the tonic. I knocked the medicine bowl from his hand, yet he showed no anger, merely refilled it with a calm expression. After I finished the entire bowl of medicine, he set it down, avoiding my gaze as if speaking to me, yet also deceiving himself. My feelings for Omping have always been nothing but gratitude. Ilara, you are forever different from others. You are my only wife. You understand me, don't you? He had already made his decision. I paid him no mind. I simply looked at his faintly purplish lips and laughed aloud. I saw Omping again, half a month later. By then, she had assumed a new identity as an orphan girl serving by the Empress Dowager's side. This empress, who had been neglected during the late emperor's reign, devoted herself entirely to Buddha and Tao after her young daughter's passing, withdrawing from worldly affairs. Now, the outside world knew I was bedridden with illness, and since the inner palace still needed someone to manage affairs, she returned under that very pretext. She also brought back those who had sent Emperor Julian to her. Emperor Julian was furious. He resented his mother, yet for Onping's sake, he had no choice but to cooperate with her. On the day the Empress Dowager returned to the palace, her son Emperor Julian did not go to welcome her, yet the Empress Dowager seemed unbothered, as if her years guarding the imperial mausoleum had softened her heart with kindness. She ordered her attendant nanny to deliver a plate of sugar cakes to the emperor. It was said she made them herself, and fearing they would grow cold on the journey, she even kept a charcoal stove warm for them. That day, Emperor Julian sat alone in his study all afternoon, and in the end, he did not return the plate of sugar cakes. He did not crave sweets, but he yearned for the fleeting joy of his neglectful birth mother, once making treats just for him. A simple plate of pastries brought tears to his eyes. That night, he sat in my palace for a long time, as if he had much to say, from the grievances of his youth to this very plate of cakes. But I already knew all about his childhood hardships, and this gesture with the cakes meant little to me. In the end, he simply sat there in silence throughout the entire night. At last, when the first morning light streamed in, he said, "Ilara, perhaps I should let go." He wanted to release the hatred of the past and make peace with his former self. With just a plate of pastries, the life Clara and I fought desperately to preserve when his birth mother abandoned him, he chose to forgive so easily. I was somewhat shocked, looking at him properly for the first time in days. My gaze swept over his increasingly pale and haggard face, and I finally remarked, "How pathetic." But Emperor Julian did not see it that way. He looked at me and said solemnly, "Ilara, I am the emperor." This was the first time he emphasized his status in front of me. After receiving a plate of pastries from his birth mother, after believing he could grasp the love he lacked in his youth, just like that, Emperor Julian unhesitatingly betrayed his former self. In the end, he stood up, looking down at me. "Ilara, if you remain so stubborn, if you refuse to understand me, there will be others who will. Those who understand him are naturally on the Empress Dowager's side." The maternal love Emperor Julian had yearned for over 20 years, though belated, had finally arrived. But that love didn't seem entirely genuine. At the very least, the Empress Dowager never noticed Emperor Julian's increasingly unsteady steps and gradually thinning frame. Yet Emperor Julian was easily satisfied. A plate of pastries, a few words of concern, and treasures would flow endlessly toward the Empress Dowager's chambers, as if trying to compensate for all the years of neglect. In contrast, my side seemed much quieter and much freer. That day, I had just used the pretext of feeding fish to slip a secret letter into the mouth of a koi in the Linglong Pond. Turning around, I bumped into Princess Serafina, standing behind me. She wore a veil hat, her loose hair covering her missing half ear. "You're pathetic," she said, looking at me with a provocative smile. "No matter how much you resent my staying in the capital, not only have I remained, but I've moved into the palace. His Majesty even allows me to serve before him. We're together all day long." Seeing my lack of reaction, she stepped closer, her words dripping with undisguised malice. She said, "You and your friends are all useless trash." Hearing this, I tossed all the bait in my hand and looked at her. Omping's smile vanished. I merely took a step toward her, and she trembled in fright. Yet she did not retreat, her eyes darting toward the shadows where someone had already slipped away to report to the emperor, as if fearing I wouldn't punish her harshly enough. Omping kept provoking me with her words. "Your friend is truly useless." Just a few taunts about you in her presence, and she was ready to strike. How laughable that she gave such sincerity to those two brothers. Yet in the end, no one was willing to trust her. And then, before she could finish, a crisp slap interrupted her. I did not move, but with a glance to the palace attendants beside me, someone stepped forward to restrain her. Everyone serving by my side was carefully selected. They never held back when swinging a slap, putting their full force into it. Even though Omping had come to provoke intentionally, she was stunned by the blow. "Ilara, you wretched woman." Her cheeks swollen high, she glared at me with venom in her eyes. Smack! Another slap sent one of her teeth flying out. Hurried footsteps echoed from outside the courtyard. Omping looked at me with triumph in her eyes, but in the next moment, her tone turned mournful. "Your Majesty, save me." But it wasn't His Majesty who arrived. It was the chief maid from the Empress Dowager's side. "His Majesty fainted in the Imperial study today, and the Empress Dowager asks you to return quickly to prepare for a visit." After speaking, she seemed to notice me for the first time and instantly fell silent. I looked at Omping with amusement. Now, genuine terror was written across her face. But I did not press her further, only glanced at the eagle whistle hanging over her heart. "What a unique trinket," I said. "I've heard that before Princess Serafina married the King of the Steppes, she received such an eagle whistle as a token of affection. Rumors say she and the Step King were already pledged each other before the political marriage. If true, it would make for quite the romantic tale. The people restraining Onping released their hold, and she trembled violently before collapsing to the ground. He looked at me as if he had seen a ghost, even forgetting to bow, scrambling up from the ground in a daze before fleeing. That very night, a secret missive was delivered into my hands. The messenger's voice was urgent, saying only that he might have been exposed, asking how far the surprise attack army had advanced. After a moment's thought, I waved my hand and wrote the reply, approaching the city walls. The next day, Emperor Julian, having woken from his illness, came to my quarters. He came to stand up for Onping, now looking at me with clear disapproval on his face. She is not like you. She has no one to rely on in this palace. Why must you trouble her? Julian, stop deceiving yourself, I said. The world seldom offers perfect solutions that please everyone. Emperor Julian fell silent for a long time before finally speaking. But I am the emperor. This was the second time he emphasized his status before me, declaring that to compensate Onping, he had decided to take her as his consort. In the past, he had despised his father for using that very reason to justify blatantly favoring the imperial consort and her son. Now, it has finally become his excuse for breaking his promises and failing his commitments. In a daze, his features overlapped with those of the late emperor, who had once scornfully called him worthless at the palace banquet. Power is always the most blinding of temptations. I glanced at his pale face, then thought of the one who had secretly entered the capital. Slowly, I curved the corners of my lips. Emperor Julian may reign now, but not for much longer. I seldom allow others to provoke me with the same reason a third time, as if to deliberately warn me. Emperor Julian specially arranged an investiture ceremony for Onping. It was the most glorious and triumphant moment of her life. Dressed in lavish robes and adorned with glittering jewels, she walked toward the one she adored. She reached out her hand to him, but just as their palms were about to meet, her expression suddenly shifted. Onping swiftly drew a dagger from her sleeve and thrust it fiercely toward Emperor Julian's heart. In the past, Emperor Julian could have easily dodged such a strike, but now, even his reactions were half a beat slower than others. In his panic, his arm was brutally pierced by the dagger. Before she could strike again, Onping was subdued by the imperial guards who rushed over. Yet, undaunted, she blew the eagle whistle in her hand. After a long while, there was no response. Waiting for your warriors from the steps, I smiled, drawing a long bow, and standing not far away, speaking softly to her. You knew all along. Her expression instantly shifted to one of shock. Of course I knew, because the one you've been communicating with has always been me. I spoke with a smile, drawing the bowstring taut, the arrowhead aimed squarely at Onping's utterly pale face. I said, did you really think the few spies you brought could coordinate from within to swallow the city? Within the first month you planted them here, I had already rooted every single one of them out. And that city defense map you worked so hard to steal, it's in my hands. Your steppe cavalry never received the signal. And today, no one will come to save you. Why? Onping screamed. My fingertips released, and an arrow instantly pierced through her abdomen. That was where Clara was first harmed. Because I hold grudges fiercely and am quite wicked, I most enjoy watching people fall from their peak into hell. Saying this, I closed one eye and aimed at her calf. Once, Clara was pushed into the lake by her, freezing her legs until they were ruined. Another scream rang out as I drew the bowstring taut and aimed at her once more. Today, my spirits were unusually high. I couldn't help curling my lips and whistling softly to mimic the sound of an arrow. Whoosh! Thud! Onping trembled in the wind, covered in blood, crawling on the ground, screaming at me, just kill me. Why not kill me outright? I will kill you. You can wait for it. But before that, I intend to collect every debt owed. In the end, Onping, pierced by 42 arrows, was dragged away and thrown into the dungeon, where she wailed for hours before breathing her last. Only then did people realize their majestic emperor had not uttered a single word throughout. A glance revealed Emperor Julian collapsed on the ground, utterly senseless. Everyone knew that the current emperor fell gravely ill from the shock and rage of being betrayed and assassinated by his beloved consort. At first, he could still make some sounds. He tried to beg me to save him, but I merely smiled and sat sipping tea. During this time, the Empress Dowager came once. After confirming Emperor Julian was beyond recovery, she made no effort to hide her disgust, covering her nose and mouth as she left. Emperor Julian, who had been straining to call out to her, fell still. He just stiffened his neck, watching her hurried retreat until she vanished from sight. After that day, he could no longer speak. But a kingdom cannot be without its ruler for even a day. So when I brought back the ninth prince, who had been living in exile among the common people, Emperor Julian's eyes widened with unmistakable fury. If parents love their child, they plan for their future. The late emperor went to great lengths to protect the ninth prince, and I, too, expended much effort to track him down, I said, gently smoothing the disheveled hair from Emperor Julian's face. Of course, there are parents who do not love their children. To please the new emperor, the Empress Dowager felt you were too conspicuous in this palace and suggested you be moved out. This time, Emperor Julian no longer struggled. His convulsive movements ceased, the light in his eyes turning into a pool of stagnant water. He simply gazed at me calmly, then closed his eyes after a long while, a single tear rolling down. Yet I smiled and asked him to set his heart at ease, saying I would only take back what was rightfully mine. I was not greedy for more. For instance, Clara and I once saved his life. Now, returning his healthy body was not too much to ask. For instance, the kingdom I fought to secure for him, he ought to return it intact. He failed to keep his vows, hurting Clara, who truly cared for him, and pushing away Prince Theron, who respected and loved him. Now, left utterly alone, he had it coming. From whence he came, he shall return. Emperor Julian was sent back to the former crown prince's manor, now long desolate and reduced to ruins. The new emperor decreed that he be confined there, forbidden to leave without an imperial edict. I was responsible for sending him off, and before parting, I told him one final truth. Omping's plea back then wasn't for you. She had fallen for the step-prince, and they were already deeply in love. You were never part of it. Emperor Julian listened quietly, showing no reaction. Only as I turned to leave did his gaze follow me, his face etched with sorrow and regret. No need to meet again. Emperor Julian, I said, turning and walking out the door. I'm sorry. As the door closed, I thought I heard his choke sobs. When I turned around, I bumped into the person I expected to see. It was the gaunt Prince Theron, now obsessed with seeking immortality and enlightenment. He had attempted suicide multiple times, only to be saved each time. He had come looking for me on purpose. Standing before me, Prince Theron fixed his gaze intently on me. He said, I understand what the mission is now. Ilara, you approached us only to complete your tasks. That's true for me. At least, I shrugged, neither confirming nor denying. But Clara, I remember that day again, when Clara looked at me with starlight shimmering in her eyes. She said, yeah, Prince Theron truly loves me, and I want to stay here for him. After hearing my words, Prince Theron seemed reignited, a flicker of hope rising in his expression. I know, if the person is willing, they can exchange with the system for one chance to return. He looked at me, speaking cautiously, and I nodded under his expectant gaze. Of course, but I shifted my tone, a smile gracing my face. She only once wanted to stay for you. How long ago was that once? Have you ever wondered? From the moment she decided to jump, it was destined she would never return. Do you know why? Because you are not worthy. I enunciated the last 3 words slowly, then left in high spirits, ignoring the utterly devastated Prince Theron. Not long after, I heard that the virtuous king had thrown himself into the river again, still unwilling to give up, determined to find his princess in another world. But this time, he wasn't fortunate enough to be rescued. By the time he was found, he had already begun to decay. To all young girls who love romance, remember this. A man who's gone bad isn't worth keeping. After all matters were settled, I lit a charcoal brazier in a sealed chamber. With my current physical condition, I would die quickly. As I closed my eyes, scenes from when I first arrived in this foreign world surfaced. Back when the four of us were always together, admiring flowers on sunny days and playing flutes under the moonlight. Whether out of true feeling or pretense, everyone in those memories always smiled joyfully. Just before the end, I suddenly opened my eyes and, with my last ounce of strength, gave an order to the hidden guards outside. If there's a chance, I must give the Empress Dowager a beating. Ugh, that wretched old woman, daring to bring me misfortune. I departed with my eyes rolled back, as if it had all been just a dream. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a soft, large bed. In the time it took to stretch, Clara rushed over at the sound and nearly pressed her entire face against my forehead. "Sweetie, you're awake." She grinned foolishly at me, though her eyes dodged guiltily. I silently rose from the bed and began stretching my limbs. Clara kept backing away with a strained smile. "Let's talk this through. Really, we can still negotiate." Ignoring her, I rushed forward, pinned her down, and threw her onto the carpet. "Say it, will you still be a love? Struck fool?" I pressed down on her, wishing I could jab my fingers right into her brain. Wah, I was wrong. I'll never be a man's lapdog again. Clara covered her face, sobbing pitifully. After a moment, she peeked over cautiously. Yeah, did you really go after them?" I thought for a moment, then nodded. "Pretty much." "Oh." Clara's voice was muffled, lost in thought. It didn't matter. If she dared utter even half a word sympathizing with men, my slap would instantly meet her face. But she had no time to pity men. Clara made a far more thrilling discovery. The system paid up. Our joint account just got 30 million. Clara was ecstatic, but my expression darkened. Only 30 million? After all that backbreaking work, just 30 million? Hey, I think 30 million might be enough. Honey, what are you going to do? Settle accounts with the system. Ding, another 30 million. Clara cheered. Pretty much, I thought to myself, looking at Clara's excited smile. The full sense of being alive finally returned to me. Gazing at the sunlight streaming through the window, I felt that every day from now on would be bright and splendid.